He brought these standards in with the image of Tiberius, the current emperor, on them. The Jews didn't like it. And after 5 days of revolt, Pilate threatened to kill them, but they lay down in the street, bare their neck, and say, kill us, fine. We'd rather you kill us than have to deal with this. So we're going to move on with the prefects, procurators, legates, and governors. And we'll talk about what all those Roman offices are. Okay? First of all, let's talk about where they lived. We've talked about this before, but let me just highlight it again. The prefects and procurators lived in Caesarea. Caesarea was a nice little coastal town, peaceful, calm, waves lapping at the shoreline, very nice. Giant Olympic-sized pool there that Herod the Great had built, very nice place. Jerusalem was a dusty, dingy place filled with Jews. The Romans didn't like that, so they lived in Caesarea. By the way, the Syrian governors lived in Antioch, Syria. Okay? By the way, the kings, King Herod the Great, King Agrippa I, they lived in Jerusalem. They had palaces in Jerusalem. Herod Agrippa II, he never became, look over here, he never became ruler over the region of Judea. Okay? So he stayed in different places. He was first tetrarch over Chalcis, so he stayed there for a while. He had a home in Beirut for a while. We'll talk about this in just a minute, okay? But anyway, the Caesarea Maritima, or just plain old Caesarea, was home of the Romans. Right here is the Pilate stone that we mentioned a couple weeks ago. That's going to become very important for us today here in just a minute. So remember what that stone looks like? I'm going to bring it up in just a minute. That was found in Caesarea. That's part of a stone step or something. They had reused this stone. Okay, Caesarea is very important in the New Testament. They have all these references in the New Testament, all of them in Acts, I guess. We see that Philip was settled in Caesarea. Paul was sent to Tarsus from Caesarea. Cornelius was stationed at Caesarea. Herod Agrippa I executed the prison guards before going to Caesarea. Herod Agrippa I died here in Caesarea, it's mentioned in Acts 12. Paul stopped in Caesarea at the end of his second missionary journey. Paul stayed with Philip in Caesarea. Paul was sent to Caesarea for trial by Felix and in prison for 2 years under Felix. And then he was tried again before Festus 2 years later. Okay? So Caesarea figures very prominently in the New Testament. All right. So that's where the Roman procurators and prefects stayed. Now, let's talk about Roman province types. There were two different kinds of Roman provinces as decided by Octavian, who was the first emperor of Rome, Emperor Augustus. Okay? He set up imperial provinces and senatorial provinces. Imperial provinces had military associated with them, of which Judea was a imperial province that answered to the larger province of Syria, which was also an imperial province. These provinces had military associated with them, one or more legions associated with them. Senatorial provinces did not. This is great news for the emperor. Octavian was pretty smart setting it up this way because senators would not have any control over any of the military. Only the emperor would in these provinces. If they needed to call the military up for some reason to put down a revolt somewhere, the emperor could do that. The senators could not. Okay? So the province of Judea was a sub-province of the larger imperial province of Syria. So, imperial provinces, also known as legates, were under the direct control of the Roman emperor, as I mentioned. They were ruled by someone appointed by the Roman emperor, typically a proconsul who was previously a consul. Pro means former. So a proconsul is a former consul, okay? Or a propraetor, a person who was previously a praetor, okay? We're going to talk about procurators later on, after we talk about the prefects, and you would think that a procurator would be a former curator or a curator, which is a Roman office, but it's not, because everything, every mold has to be broken somewhere along the line. So procurator was not a former curator or a curator, but proconsuls and propraetors were former consuls and praetors, okay? We're going to talk about all those offices of the Romans under chapter 11 in a few, 2 or 3 weeks probably. Usually, imperial provinces were provinces that caused trouble for the Romans, like Judea, and therefore needed a military presence. Judea became a separate Roman province in AD 6. Judea's leaders answered to the Syrian governor, who was typically a proconsul. Okay? A proconsul was a larger, higher office than prefects and procurators. So these prefects and procurators, on the chart over there, answered to a proconsul of the Syrian province. Okay? For example, Pontius Pilate, who was a prefect, We'll talk about him in a minute. He answered to 3 different rulers of the Syrian province during his term. He ruled for a pretty long time. And I'll list the names there. The length of service of the administrators was the discretion of the emperor, because the emperor had full control of imperial provinces. All right, now for senatorial provinces. They were under control of the Roman Senate. Makes sense. Divided in 2 classes, those administered by proconsuls and those by propraetors. Okay. Just as an aside, only Africa and Asia were consular senatorial provinces. All others were praetorian or propraetors. Consular provinces were proconsul controlled, appointed by the Senate, but a procurator was typically designated by the emperor to handle the financial matters of the region. They were usually peaceful regions. There was no need of a military presence there, just they had standard security services for the rulers and things. Okay. Typically governed by a proconsul or procurator chosen by lot. It turns out that even if you were a procurator coming in to rule a region, a senatorial region, you were given the title of proconsul even if you had not been a consul before. So that's a little bit of a confusion there too. Okay. So a procurator could jump straight to a proconsul title without being a consul if they took over a senatorial province. Typically 5 years or more was elapsed between their holding of an office in the capital of Rome, a consul or a praetor, to when a province was given to them as a propraetor, then becoming a proconsul. And they had 1-year terms. All right, prefects and procurators. I'm covering a lot in a hurry, but we will slow down and look at some of these offices a little bit later on, okay? But I want to show you specifically what's going on in Judea, okay? Prefects first. Both offices were created by Augustus when he chose to divide the empire in the 2 provinces we talked about. The primary responsibility was keep the peace. That's all you had to do, keep the peace, collect taxes, and if you were over the province of Judea, you were to go to Jerusalem and keep the peace during the Jewish feasts, okay, Passover, etc., tabernacles, whatever. You were to go to Jerusalem and keep the peace, okay. Prefects and procurators are sometimes used interchangeably in the literature. Josephus and Tacitus, actually a Roman author and historian, gets these prefects confused with procurators. They call that both Josephus and Tacitus call all these people procurators. That's not correct. We'll go back to the Pilate stone that tells us that's not correct, because that's a contemporary piece of literature, carved in stone, that shows that Pilate was a prefect. What's the difference between prefects and procurators? Prefects control particularly smaller or strategic important provinces, like Judea under Pontius Pilate. They had a strong military component to their authority. They exercised both administrative and judicial authority, thus Pilate judging Jesus, okay? They could come from the Senatorial, which is, there's offices of Rome and there's classes of Romans, okay? The Senatorial class was like the highest class of the Romans, okay? Then you had the equestrian class under them. So they could be of either the equestrian class or the Senatorial class, okay? In Judea, prefects ruled between Herod Archelaus, an ethnarch, and Herod Agrippa as king, as you can see over there. The green area is the prefects. When Herod Archelaus was a bad guy and got banished, and then they ruled up until the time that Herod Agrippa I came along and took over under Claudius. Procurators were typically primarily concerned with financial administration. They were almost exclusively held by members of the equestrian order. A procurator worked alongside a proconsul in imperial provinces, but answered directly to the emperor. Okay, he did not answer to the proconsul, but directly to the emperor, because the emperor wanted to have a good handle on what was going on financially in the territories. Procurators could be governors of smaller provinces like Judea, the purple areas over there, okay, and have both financial and judicial authority, like they did. We see that. In Judea, procurators ruled between Herod Agrippa I, the blue king there, hard to see on the chart, but if you have the book, it's clear if you can see it up closer. So they ruled between Agrippa I and to when Jerusalem fell in AD 70, okay, when the legates took over. Turns out there's a nice alphabetical history of prefects and procurators. Yay! It's kind of weird how some of this stuff lines up, or maybe I just make it up. I don't know. So which came first, prefects or procurators? Well, pre comes before pro, so prefects came before procurators. The order of rule, at least in Judea, prefects were first, procurators were second. The province type typically was an imperial province for prefects and senatorial province for procurators. The provinces were combative under prefects, imperial provinces, and peaceful under procurators or senatorial provinces. In Judea, the prefect came after an ethnarch. Procurators, in the purple there, came after a king. Okay, Herod Agrippa the First. The first one was appointed by Augustus for prefects and Claudius for procurators. And the first prefect was Coponius. The first procurator was Fadius, C versus F. All right. Yeah, I'm not going to give you all a test, but if I were, I might throw that in and say that might be a good thing to know. The chain of command of the provinces. The senatorial province can be broken into two, but really, remember I told you a propraetor generally became a proconsul. So right before this guy was named to be over a region, it was he was a propraetor, but then he became a proconsul. And then under that proconsul ruled the procurators, prefects, client kings, whatever. Okay, Herod Agrippa the First, Herod Agrippa the Second, client kings, of course. Pilate, good example. Festus, Felix, good example of procurators. Okay, but those, of course, would be under imperial provinces. The Roman emperor over imperial provinces, there's a proconsul, sometimes a propraetor in charge, and then basically the same structure under that for the imperial provinces. So, let's talk about the prefects. And if you have the book, you can open it up and look at the green area over here. Remember, this is between Herod Archelaus and Agrippa the First. Okay? So the prefects, we start out with Coponius. Now, I'm not going to talk about these very much. We're going to talk about two of them actually in some detail. So I'm not going to talk about Coponius, Ambivius, Rufus, or Gratus. I will say about Gratus, he was somebody who was well known for appointing high priests. He just liked appointing high priests, and he ended up appointing somebody we know very well, Caiaphas, the high priest over the trial of Jesus. Okay, he appointed him in 18 AD, and he was actually the longest ruling high priest of the Roman period. Now, not all of high priest, all of history, but during the Roman period, he was the longest ruling high priest. Now, if you have the book, you can go to Appendix D and see a list of all the high priests from Aaron back in the day, all the way through the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. When I was making that appendix, I was kicking myself saying, why am I making this appendix? Because it's the only one that I'm aware of in the literature that lists all the high priests from the beginning of time all the way through the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay? The list was hard to find. You had to go and piece it together from different pieces of literature and lists that other people had and whatever, and it was hard to find. And I break it out by who appointed them. Was this high priest appointed by Agrippa the First? Was he appointed by the procurator? Was he appointed by a prefect or whatever? So all that's listed out in that appendix. So if you're interested in really deep study of Old Testament stuff, that's a pretty good appendix for you to go to that I don't think is in the literature anywhere else. Okay, Pontius Pilate. We're going to talk about him in some detail. We're going to talk about Marcellus in some detail. We'll talk about Marcellus in the context of Petronius, who was a Roman Syrian governor. Okay, so he was Marcellus's boss, but he was a good guy. And we're going to talk about how he really stuck his neck out. And boy, it about cost him his neck too. And he did that for the Jews. Pretty good guy. Oh, first let's talk about the priestly family of Annas. So Annas was one of the guys where Jesus had his first trial. He was high priest emeritus at the time of Jesus. Okay, he had a trial under Caiaphas, the high priest at the time. Okay, who was the son-in-law of Annas the First. And Annas the First had a bunch of sons and a son-in-law that were high priests. And he also had a grandson that was high priest. Okay, so that's in page 288 in the book. All right, now let's talk about Pilate. Prefect number 5. As I mentioned, Tacitus and Josephus both call him a procurator, but other evidence shows he was a prefect. He violated rule number 1 of prefects: keep the peace. He was not very good at that at all. He brought images, at one occasion, of Tiberius into Jerusalem. Oh, the Jews did not like images of people on anything. Their coins, these standards, the aquila, they didn't like images on anything, and the Jews revolted. Now, these standards look like this. SPQR stands for Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome. If you ever see one of these, you can say Senate and people of Rome. Okay, you kind of see that, right? Senate and people of Rome, if you translate that to English. Well, he brought these standards in with the image of Tiberius, the current emperor, on them. The Jews didn't like it. And after 5 days of revolt, Pilate threatened to kill them, but they lay down in the street, bare their neck, and say, kill us, fine. We'd rather you kill us than have to deal with this. And he finally relented. It's interesting to note that by the 4th century A.D., this had image of Jesus on them under Constantine the Great. We see the beginnings, who basically made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. Okay, we see the rise of the popes, the papacy, and all that kind of stuff coming at that time. Images of Jesus on the aquila. All right. Pilate at another time set up gold-plated shields in Herod's palace. Jews complained to Tiberius. He ordered Pilate to remove him. Pilate was just making trouble all over the place. Okay. He later killed a bunch of Jews who complained about a waterworks project. Well, he stole the funds from the temple to do this waterworks project, and the Jews didn't like it very much. Okay? He butchered a bunch of Samaritans, another occasion, who had gone to Mount Gerizim looking for artifacts of Moses. The Syrians complained to the Syrian governor, Vitellius, who then sent Pilate to Rome to answer for his actions. Luckily for Pilate, Tiberius died while he was on his way to Rome, and Pilate may have committed suicide during Caligula's reign. Now, it's interesting to me, remember I'm trying to tie everything historically to stuff or biblically, okay? Did Pilate's antipathy toward the Jews go a long way in his attitude toward Jesus? When I was a kid growing up, and a younger adult even, I thought, Pilate's not a bad guy. You know, he really wanted to release Jesus, right? Okay, I'll scourge him and then let him go. Okay, I'll let a prisoner go. I mean, another prisoner go. You know, I'll do anything to let this guy's done nothing. What's wrong with you people? I learned later, Pilate was not a nice guy. Killing people was something he did. Okay, why Jesus? Why Jesus? I think part of his attitude could be in the fact that he had such antipathy for the Jews who was bringing Jesus to Pilate? The Jews, right? The high priest, the priest. Was his antipathy toward the Jews the reason for him trying to be lenient toward Jesus and finally capitulating, giving in when the Jews said, we're going to tell the emperor, oh dear, don't do that. Because why? I've done all these things that are bad. The emperor has scolded me so many times. Tiberius has scolded me so many times for bringing the standards in, for doing all these things. And finally, I'm having an answer to the emperor for butchering the Syrians. Don't tell the emperor, please. Okay, let's kill Jesus. It's interesting how history and the Bible line up, I think. All right, that's Pontius Pilate, number 5. Prefect number 6, Marcellus. Replaced Pilate in AD 36. He seemed to have less power than the prefects before him. The reason I say that is because Pontius Pilate was consulted by the Jews. The Jews dared not kill Jesus before taking him before Pilate, right? It seems like Pilate ruled with an iron fist, whereas the next guy, Marcellus, maybe not. Because the Jews killed Stephen, the first Christian martyr, without any concern about Marcellus at all. I mean, they just stoned him right there where they stood. Okay? They didn't consult Marcellus. So it makes me think that Marcellus did not rule with an iron fist. And Marcellus was replaced a year later by Marcellus, who is the last prefect over the region. All right. So here's a timeline in the book on page 286. I have the Roman emperors up here. We see when Augustus died and Tiberius took over, and then Caligula and then Claudius. Okay, we see the Syrian governors. We'll talk about them in just a minute. We'll talk about a couple of them, but not all of them. We see as far as how the Roman prefects came about. They started when Herod Archelaus was banished in AD 6, and then we see the 7 prefects, and then we see how the king of Judea, Herod Agrippa I, took over after the prefects. Okay. In a second, we'll talk about procurators. After Herod Agrippa I was when the procurators took over, and I got a separate chart for that. And I'll let you line up stuff, and you can see that the first prefects ruled under the Emperor Augustus, Pilate ruled under Tiberius, for example, etc. Okay. All right. So the procurators came after the death of Herod Agrippa I and up until the time of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. All right. We'll talk about 5 of these. Okay. Fadus, Felix, Festus, Albinus, and Florus. Now, isn't it interesting that these guys, all the F procurators, alphabetically line up? Oh my, what a neat memory device if you were taking a test. Fadus, Felix, Festus, Florus, in that order. That's kind of cool. So we'll talk about, like I say, these five, the four Fs, and Albinus as we go. All right, here's the chart again. Again over there, prefects first. Agrippa in blue for 3 years ruled these three regions and the rest for longer. And then the procurators took over. Herod Agrippa II did not gain control of the area at all because the procurators were in charge. Okay. I've not heard a bell, but I see it's 11:30. Ha! I can keep you off till noon, 12:30, 1 o'clock. We will pick up with the procurators next week. Thank y'all for coming. Hope to see you next week.